What's up, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. Welcome back to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast live on YouTube. Wanted to continue to post videos about the coming fights and the sports headlines that are out there currently in the wide world of sports. So, where do I start? So, I advertised today's show as a show where I would break down the five, not one, not two, not three, not four, five things that made Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather happen. The fight that will be contested on August 26th, live at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Very interesting stuff, to say the least, and I'm excited to see how this pans out. In thinking about the fight the last few days since it was announced on the 14th, I believe, I wanted to come up with a list of what I felt made this fight happen. How did this fight happen? What made it happen? What made it official? So, first off, I'd like to start off, and it's in no particular order, but I'd like to start off by saying that the fans made this fight happen. Much like Dana White said, the fans were clamoring for this fight from the boxing world, from the MMA world. Both sports kind of collided in terms of their fan bases asking for this fight. And this is not the first time that boxing has done something of this nature, in which they had a boxer face off against a mixed martial artist type fighter. Muhammad Ali did it back in the 70s. Riggs versus so-and-so. But none of those fights are even a comparison to this fight, where you have the two biggest names in both boxing and MMA going up against each other, a sight that I never thought I would live to see. I really, realistically had no expectations that this fight were to happen, being that I've been a combat sports fan for as long as I have, and I saw both Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao somewhat dodge each other the last 6-7 years, up until from 2008 to 2015, when they finally decided to sign on the dotted line and fight each other. So, being that that was the case, I did not expect Floyd Mayweather to sign on the dotted line, on the bottom line, for Conor McGregor, and he did so. So, with that being said, I really wanted to talk about what made this fight happen. The fans, I believe, made this fight happen. What else? However you want to put it, MMA, boxing, both came together and said, yes, we want this fight to happen. Obviously, fourth on the list is the Floyd Mayweather representation. Al Heyman, Leonard Ellerbe, longtime guys in the Floyd Mayweather camp, and have worked with Floyd for many years. And they're two guys that have really built a lot of fights inside the sport of boxing, and they've built up fighters in their brand very successfully, and with relative ease. They've been able to really build big names inside their Team Mayweather brand, and they're very successful. They're very good at putting big money fights together, where Floyd is responsible for the biggest pay-per-views in all of boxing. And it says a lot, because here you have an athlete that might not be the most entertaining to watch. He might not be a guy that we find his style the most entertaining, but he is a guy that can really attract the audience. He really can gauge into what people want to see. He has a real keen ability for finding a fight that, business-wise makes sense for him, and it makes sense for the fans. So kudos to Floyd in that regard, always seeming to find, the rabbit out of the hat, so to speak. Something else that I wanted to, address in terms of the fighters, how this fight happened. I would have to attribute that to Conor McGregor as well, for being able to build himself into the draw that he is today, in terms of his outside the octagon press conference persona, delivering one-liners. everything that he has been able to build in his own self, in his own career, has been pretty remarkable. To think that this guy was on social welfare 4 years ago, and now he is in the biggest payday fight that a fighter could possibly be in, fighting against Floyd Mayweather. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Number two, I wanted to say that we got Floyd's representation, you got Conor, you got the four. I'll get to that. Number two, okay, I just kind of spoiled number one, but number two, I would say, is Dana White. Dana White making this fight happen. Dana White kind of representing Conor McGregor in the negotiation side of things with the Mayweather camp. And realistically, I did not expect Dana White to put his best foot forward, so to speak, by making this fight. I thought that Dana White would kind of steer away from it, stay clear of it, and go in a different direction with Conor's career, in which he defend his title for the first time in his career. And that did not happen. So Dana White, I contributed to him being the second, number two ranked out of the five that made this happen. Number one, the number one thing that made this fight happen, and nobody has even brought it up, not that I have seen from all the mainstream MMA shows, UFC Tonight, MMA Hour, nobody has brought up the fact that the UFC sold for $4.2 billion shortly after UFC 200. UFC 200 was the first instance of the news that we had heard that the UFC was going to sell, and it eventually did shortly after UFC 200, the last Zuffa-owned UFC pay-per-view, until WME IMG, William Morris Endeavor, bought the company for $4.2 billion. So being that they bought the company for $4.2 billion, a over-expenditure to say the least in the eyes of many, and especially in the eyes of business, it was widely reported that the UFC has been trying to make the money fights ever since to get that return, to make due on that return of the $4 billion that they invested in the company. And what better way to get a return on your investment than put your biggest star in there with the biggest star in boxing? It was a brilliant move in terms of getting back some of the capital that you upped the ante for the UFC. Really, it was an overbid by William Morris Endeavor, and one of the reasons why they wanted the company, they wanted to be a part of the first Madison Square Garden event, they wanted to be a part of the new events in T-Mobile Arena. But what better way? You're not putting together a bigger fight with anyone else than Floyd Mayweather. There's nobody else that Conor could fight that could make him the most money, that could make the UFC the most money, and that is why this fight happened. And in large part, it was due to the fact that the UFC sold for $4.2 billion. Now, I want to make myself clear here. I'm still not a big fan of this fight. I am a purist, a boxing purist, a MMA purist. I want to see the progression go as it's supposed to. I want the train to move along. I want the fighters that are in the UFC to defend their belt, to make their careers in the UFC. I want boxing to be its own entity. If they want to make fights in boxing that they feel are the best fights, then they can do that. But for boxing to put their biggest name, get him out of retirement, and put him up against a bigger name in the sport of MMA, the biggest name in the sport of MMA, Conor McGregor, I truly feel that it was a short-sighted move by Showtime, by Floyd, by Conor, by Dana, by the UFC, a short-sighted move because of the date. They picked August 26th for the date. They could have done it in October, but business is business. And the first minute that I saw that date was before Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin, I there realized they did this on purpose. Why pick a fight for Labor Day weekend the week before Labor Day weekend, if I'm not mistaken. Why would you pick a fight for that particular date? The only other reason why they would do so is because of the fact that they wanted to avoid competing with Canelo and Golovkin. They didn't want that to be the set precedent beforehand. They wanted to set the precedent before Canelo and Golovkin duke it out on September 16th. So August 26th, they put Mayweather and McGregor together, put them in there as quickly as they possibly can. It's a win for boxing because it gives Conor less time to train. It's a win for Floyd because of the fact that he got the bigger payday out of the two. Obviously, he's the A side, as he alluded to during all the trash talk thus far. So, that really irked me. Boxing was finally at a point where they could kind of move on from Floyd Mayweather. They were trying to move on from the lackluster performance that was Mayweather-Pacquiao in the ring. Outside the ring, it sold millions and millions of pay-per-views. Still holds the North American record. So, on the financial side, it was a success. Everyone knew it was going to be. But the fight itself set boxing back quite a bit, and they put boxing back together with guys like Canelo Alvarez, with guys like Terence Crawford, with guys like Gennady Golovkin, with guys like Andre Ward, with guys like Vasyl Lomachenko. There are guys out there in boxing that are big superstars waiting in the wings, and now they are put kind of in the back seat. Floyd's riding Conor's riding shotgun, and Floyd's driving the cab. So it's it is what it is, but I'm not completely enamored with the thought of this fight because I fear as well that Conor could be done in the UFC. Now, reports are stating that Conor won't be done in the UFC, that he will duke it out with the number one contender in the UFC's lightweight division, which, who the hell is that? I mean, Khabib Nurmagomedov missed weight, didn't show up. Tony Ferguson, not many people know outside of MMA who he really is. So for Conor to take on Floyd and then Tony wouldn't really add up. That would sell to me as an MMA purist, but in terms of what they have done with Mayweather's career, or not Mayweather, in terms of what they have done with Conor's career, they haven't always put him up against the best challenge. They've put him up against the fighter that sells. They put him up against the fighters that will put him in a positive position if he were to win. And I really look at the featherweight days where he fought Diego Brandao, where he fought Marcus Brimage, where he fought Dennis Seaver and then was granted a UFC featherweight title shot. Dennis Seaver was long in the tooth, long past his prime. You ask me where Dennis Seaver is now, I could not tell you. So that being said, they've kind of made Conor's career a caricature of itself, and here he is in the UFC since 2013. He's won 2 titles, not one but 2 titles, and he's getting the biggest money fight that you can get in the fight game, and yet he has not defended his belt. It's a very strange, usually in the fight game, these things come after you defend your belt. You defend your belt a few times, and then you have that notoriety, but his career has kind of been reverse coursed a little bit with the attraction that he has become outside the octagon. So those are my thoughts on the 5 things that made Mayweather-McGregor happen. I would say Leonard Ellaby and Al Heyman deserve a lot of credit. I would say the representation of Conor McGregor deserve a lot of credit. Conor deserves a lot of credit for building himself into this position, along with the UFC for kind of propping him up into this position, promoting him, putting in $10 million for world tours and such. Dana White really deserves a lot of credit for negotiating this deal. But number one, this fight would not have happened had not the UFC sold for $4 billion. Maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't have, but it definitely wouldn't have happened this quick. And yes, it was quick, being that the speculation started last year in May. Oddly enough, here we are in August. 1 year ago in August, Conor was fighting Nate Diaz for the UFC rematch, for the UFC 202 rematch. So it's insane. And realistically, I wanted to come on, talk more to you guys, the listeners. I really appreciate everything you guys do, where I had a good listener base on the UFC 213 predictions. So if you haven't checked those out, my predictions for UFC 213, Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko are going to get down. main event of the evening. I'm very excited for that, to say the least. Obviously, as well, Robbie Lawler and Donald Cerrone. That's a UFC fight fan's dream, that fight. So I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you for tuning in, guys. I'm the host of the Thomas Take Sports podcast on Spreaker.com, on YouTube.com. So you'll see all the videos below of every single Thomas Take that I've done with every single guest that I have had on my show. Plenty more to come as the years go by. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.